So here we are. This is our last day on chapter 12 of Gilson's book. I would very much like to engage in some discussion and try to answer as many questions as I can, or extend in conversation some lines of thought and ideas that people have about this text and about the way that Gilson wraps up his consideration of philosophy. A couple of things that I called attention to in the reading questions and that some people wrote prompts about. The other major question from the end about the openness of philosophical systems. Those of you who took Phil 202 with me a year ago, long year ago, will remember that this was an important feature in John Paul II's Fides et Ratio, his encyclical on faith and reason. Philosophy must be an open system, not a closed system. A philosophy that becomes a closed system, that becomes a system of answers. How does he put it? A systematic philosophy that does not give value to the philosophical discourse from which it emerges and which it must always loyally serve. That's a philosophy that is inadequate to the demands of the present day. So we'll talk about open systems. Since several people did write prompts, I thought I would begin with them. You guys both wrote about the openness of the system. Let me begin with you, if I may. You wrote about an open system is needed in order to allow for progress, but you suggested there's kind of danger to an open system. Can you say a word or two more about that so we can begin talking about it, please?
Yeah, so when I was thinking about it, I thought about if someone were to ask a question and then someone else answers it, it probably is dangerous there, because when they answer it, it could lead to incorrect answers. And I'm pretty sure back then they probably had the same problem, that it would lead to incorrect answers, and they didn't know because there was no foundation yet to philosophy.
Yeah. Okay. So you get this possibility perhaps of error. It seems like one of the attractions of a closed system, although I might not call it that if I actually think it's a good idea, one of the attractions of what Gilson might call a closed system is that it precludes error. As long as you stay within the boundaries of the system, you are guaranteed to have no more error than the system allows for. We can think of how this works in axiomatized systems like Euclidean geometry, provided that you begin with the starting point of the system, you obey the laws of the system, you have truth that is guaranteed, conditional upon the system. So I take part of your point to be, not only people may disagree, but the disagreement may be unaddressable. That is, we may not be able to, if we lack a foundation on which to reply, we may be in a situation of lacking certainty. And that certainly seems like a danger I would run if I were to embrace an open system instead of a closed system. You also talked about open systems in terms of preserving something for later generations. Did you say a word or two about that?
Sure. I was really just seeing how a open system is really the only way that an environment for philosophy could thrive versus this closed system environment, which really, in a sense, kind of salts the earth in allowing for a discussion to occur where people would feel comfortable enough, where their opinions would be, I guess, respected to the point where they would have that open dialogue, which is necessary for a philosophical discussion to continue through the generations.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So a couple of thoughts along this line. Philosophy will thrive versus having a system that might be fixed and final, but then also for that reason to be dead. And I'm going back to, I wish I'd thought to actually pull out and send to you guys ahead of time the passage from Fides et Ratio about this. Okay, fine idea here. Now, again, if I'm an advocate of what might be called a closed system, I might say, look, it's not this. This is an extreme version of strawman or a caricature, or it doesn't have to be this way. Interesting idea of respect for persons, including future persons, future participants in the discourse. If people are not able to engage in an open system discourse, they will not feel that their dignity as participants in the discourse is being respected.
I feel like a closed system would limit philosophy artificially too.
Okay.
Kind of kill the philosophical spirit, because part of the philosophical spirit is like using one's reason to deduce reality. So the means of thought is reason, and the object of thought is reality. So to put in a closed system seems to artificially limit philosophy, thus killing the philosophical spirit.
Okay, this is good. So if the closed system is a kind of artificial limitation, the hazard may be that the type of reason that then is sort of bred and cultivated within a closed system may may fail to grasp reality, or may fail to grasp reality in the wrong sort of way. Is it reason, or is it reality? Is it the grasp of reality, or is it both? You think may go wrong?
I think it's the grasp of reality.
Okay. There may even be, I think there's something here, and I'm maybe reduced to speaking in metaphors, which perhaps is not terribly clarifying, that there is something both about human reason and about the reality, and I suppose also about the grasp between it, that is living in dynamic, that is Socratic in spirit. I've communicated this before in Phil 202 by saying that I think in many ways the proper mode in which to think about philosophy is to think about the philosophical question. A teacher of mine describes Socrates as the inventor of the question. He's the first guy to really come up with philosophy that's done under the dominion of the question. Over and over again, you'll see Socrates in the dialogues calling the attention of Gorgias and of Thrasymachus and Glaucon and others back to the question at hand. Right? So there's a sense in which it is the open question which governs the discourse, not the answer that's been given, even the sort of general systematic answer which needs to be filled in. Now, one accusation against the view I've just articulated is that it takes only half of the philosophical task, the questioning half, and it neglects or plays down the answer half, so that it's too open, right? Perhaps we might say with Chesterton that the purpose of opening one's mind is to close it again on something solid, same way you usually open your mouth. You never get any nutrition here. Is there a way to respond to this sort of critique that this open system runs the risk of just being, what's the other Will Rogers or some other quip, so open-minded that your brains fall out? You never run up to anything. Is there a limit to this? If you have a hand up, go ahead.
Yes, I would say that there, as with everything, the virtue lies in the middle. So you can't be so open-minded your brain falls out, but you can't also be so, closed-minded that you starve to death. So there's definitely a mean that needs to be walked, where we need to keep providing answers, but we also need to keep asking the questions to make sure the answers are getting better and better.
What have I just done? Sorry, I thought I was going to inch up just a teeny bit. Sorry. Okay, that's better. Middle path and prudence. Prudence, some of you know from study of modern ethics, one of these categories that seems to be certainly missing from a lot of contemporary discourse. Again, to sort of push back, the hazard of invoking prudence or middle path is that it doesn't actually give me advice. It simply tells me to choose right? Just be moderate, take the middle path, don't be too extreme. Is there more that can be said here? Is there some guidance other than talking about a grasp of reality that is not so final that it kills off the philosophical spirit, but that is not so sort of open-ended and tentative that it fails to satisfy the demand for truth that's built into human nature? Go ahead.
I think it might be beneficial because it allows for questions of new experiences that might come up, such as like new technology and things like that.
Okay. So we have a kind of openness to the new. I was just teaching in the previous class, just before this one, Ratzinger's essay on faith and philosophy from his book, Faith in the Future. He talks about Schleiermacher and Karl Barth and a number of theological movements. But part of what he gets to in this idea is that we need a philosophy that is not the old philosophy. We can't revive the old philosophy, sort of the old synthesis in the way that it was. We need a new philosophy that is responsive to the needs of the present time. And he's writing this in 1970, which is a sort of, that's a very 1970 thought. I mean, a new philosophy responsive to the present time. But it seems to me that it's true in a deeper way than it might have seemed at the time, precisely because it is an open system that can adapt to the times, that can be the living thing that swims against the stream. I'm in a Chesterton quoting mood. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. A question that comes to mind is philosophy, is it hard to distinguish between philosophizing and philosophizing well? Like, philosophy is a good for the human spirit. And I would argue that philosophizing well, meaning that there are objective standards you can apply to philosophy, is better than just philosophizing. But is philosophizing a good in and of itself that people kind of stop at, which is why it's hard to objectively say, like, he's philosophizing better than him, because even philosophizing poorly is still a good.
Right. Well, certainly, better than not doing it at all.
Yeah.
I suppose we could say, I mean, if we're going to sort of rank order these, right? Philosophizing well, philosophizing poorly, not philosophizing at all. So plainly, there's a ranking there. The advantage of philosophizing badly is it can be more easily turned into philosophizing well. So, is that? And perhaps this also means that people who are doing philosophy well have more in common with people who disagree with them than with people who are not giving a single thought to philosophy. Is that get at what you're heading for?
Yeah, what I'm getting at is, like, is good the enemy of better here? Like,
oh, I see.
Are people like pointing to bad philosophy, pointing out the good in it, and thus using that as grounds to show uncertainty within philosophy?
What do you think? Is there a danger there?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I would say, like, because I just watched a debate recently between a Thomist priest and an atheist.
Yeah. Bless you.
Like it's great to see a debate like that, because like they were both very learned people with very solid points and partook in this discussion that was beneficial, even though they didn't convince each other.
Yeah.
So like the openness there of philosophy is shown.
This might indicate that the sort of community or the brotherhood of serious philosophical inquirers is a significant moral community, more significant perhaps than the people who have got it right, who've got the right system and the right answer. Again, a case of putting the question prior to the answer, or defining philosophy by its attention to the question, rather than its possession of the answer. This is then a critique of closed systems, like perhaps some versions of Hegelian or Marxist systems, and there may even be some closed Thomisms, right? The Thomism of the answers. Memorize this list of propositions, and you have the answer.
No, I think to answer, I think that's where the openness of philosophy comes in, just to accept the fact that you can be wrong. It's not like philosophy is accusing somebody. It's just that you're gathering information of everybody and going to a particular truth. It's just building towards that particular truth rather than accusing someone towards a wrong.
No, that's good. I like that. It's suggesting that there's a kind of practice here, an intellectual practice that can be widely shared. that is independent, not independent of, that is prior than and more fundamental than the community of answers, which helps to guard philosophical systems against becoming ideologies, against becoming sort of political agendas or fixed objects. I associate this with the Socratic spirit in philosophy, this sort of demand of inquiry, and the way that this inquiry demands a kind of self-discipline. It demands a total submission of the self. The life of Socrates, like best possible example of this, life of a philosophical martyr. A man whose attachment to the truth and to the inquiry to the truth was so deep that it was unshakable through his trial, his imprisonment, his execution. Think back to the Apology, Crito, Phaedo sequence. Perhaps that's the spirit of philosophy that I'm sort of bringing out here in the final weeks of the semester.
Yeah, so I guess I've been thinking about the openness of philosophical systems and comparing it to empirical science. And so I have kind of a couple questions about it. One of them is an open system of philosophy like the empirical sciences in the sense of once you get new empirical information in science from perhaps a test or something like that, then you have to change, maybe your hypothesis or eventually your theory. So isn't that what an open-ended philosophical system providing for, is that once you get new information, it changes? But then another question I had is, isn't it true that with empirical sciences, they're actually closed systems? Because once you get new information, it trickles down. And so like from Newtonian physics to Einsteinian physics or whatever, you actually have to shift everything. So maybe that's a bad example in that it's not actually an open system.
Well, I don't know whether your latter point there is a question of whether the issue is that empirical science excludes wrong theories, that when Einstein showed the inadequacy of Newtonianism, you can't have Newtonianism as a final theory. It can only be a sort of working theory for some parts of reality, maybe in most parts of reality, but it's not the final story. We need some sort of a relativistic and then maybe finally an unfinished, for now, quantum theory to actually give us the true account of things.
Yeah, I guess back to the first question is, if philosophy is a closed system and you get new information, you can't do anything, right? I mean,
right. Okay. Well, closed system seems to me would either have to reject or reinterpret new information. Maybe the trouble with closed systems is they end up being pseudoscientific. They end up being more attached to the details of the principles of the system than to the realities that the system is attempting to grasp. So maybe the common element between good empirical science and good philosophical system building is an openness to changing the system in response to the real. This is maybe another way of saying the question is dominant, is saying the reality that is disclosed in our pursuit of the question is our guiding light in assembling the system, not our loyalty to the elements of the system as we currently understand them. So it might suggest that you can be a Platonist or a Hegelian or a Thomist, but you should not do so at the expense of being a philosopher first and foremost and more fundamentally. You should be a Thomist philosopher, a Hegelian philosopher. That seems to me to involve taking each of those systems as an open system rather than a closed system. Does that attempt to find a sort of commonality between empirical science and open philosophical systems seem plausible?
Yeah, it's starting to help things.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I was just thinking from a theological standpoint too. Like, it seems to me like having an open approach connects us to our being created in the likeness image of God, who we're meant to be. This awe and wonder for truth and respect for its magnitude and immensity, and versus those who doubt and try to conquer it it's almost like they're falling to their concupiscence.
There's something here maybe that Pascal and T.S. Eliot have gotten at, thinking about the passionate and intellectually serious believer. There's a passage in that T.S. Eliot essay that I included in the prompt there, where Eliot talks about to read Pascal, one must follow the process of mind of the intelligent believer, by whom he's thinking part of himself, but he's thinking of the intellectually serious, modern Christian who realizes that modernity places demands, it's disclosed realities to us, and recognition in our philosophy. So we can't go back to the old system. We can't grab the old system and sort of shave reality to fit. It's not Thomism or whatever system we have. It's not a Procrustean bed to which we discard the psychologies, the psychological discoveries, in and after Kant in order to make it fit. But at the same time, we have to respond to these realities. I take that's part of what open systematizing seems to be. It's to have a system in this Socratic spirit of inquiry. I'm pushing this pretty hard. I don't mean to suggest that it is the only conclusion with which you guys might come away from this course, but it's something I care about passionately, sort of right at the core of my thought, my identity as a teacher. And we'll see a little bit of this perhaps also in Kierkegaard to wrap up the course. This animating spark of philosophy, which seems to escape complete capture in any particular system. It's associated with the question, it's associated with this sort of the question at the heart of each one of us. Pascal's idea of the heart, or Kierkegaard's idea of the individual, and the passion of the individual, and the passionate commitment to the truth. I think Eliot taps into that a little bit. But if we do that in an intellectually serious way, if we're going to do that with integrity, then we have to reach out towards constructing a synthesis of our entire lives. You guys, I imagine they talk about synthesis in formation in terms of human goals and other things. It means pulling together your entire identity into a whole and not living a fragmented life, not living a double or triple life, and not living a life of sort of bits that you sort of carry around, in a sack. These are the pieces of me. I don't know which piece I need today, but I'll sort of sift through them and figure it out. I need to bring that together into a coherent whole. And if I'm connecting up again with writings of John Paul II, in Pastores Dabla Vobis, he talks about philosophy as the only secure basis for a total gift of self in the ordained ministry and priesthood. You have to possess yourself as a whole before you can give yourself to someone or to something, to an institution or to a person. So this idea of philosophy as a source of integrity, philosophy as a source of self-possession and total synthesis, that's the sort of intimate or inner part of it. We've been talking about systems as sort of philosophical objects, but I'm thinking also of the identity of the philosopher, the one who does philosophy. Drawing from the kind of existentialist Thomism of Gilson and others in articulating that.
I was wondering if you could restate or rephrase. You had made a point, and that's been running through about how reality that's disclosed in pursuit of the question should guide, and then I'm trying to fill in the rest there. Should guide how we.
You wanted me to finish this quote? Something like this: reality disclosed in the pursuit of the question.
Yeah, how that should guide our open system or our.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much the end of the quote. Part of this is a kind of point that may be mundane or even trite. When I say that we should pay attention to reality, one might say, well, of course, any system that begins by saying let's discard reality or shave reality to fit, make our system a Procrustean bed, that's absurd. Nobody would choose to do that. And so you might say you're strawmanning here. You're suggesting that maybe there's a philosopher whose philosophy is more important to him than the reality that philosophy is supposed to express and grasp. I do think, though, that there's a danger here, a real danger, and I don't think it's trivial, and I don't think that it never happens. So it seems to me one diagnosis of our philosophy might be that we're engaging in it in a way that neglects the openness of the system. So in some ways, this is a kind of warning to each of us in doing our philosophy and in drawing upon philosophy later in life, later in our studies, in theology studies or in pastoral ministry. It seems to affect the way in which we should articulate and especially the way in which we should teach philosophy. I've said before, I think, that each of you may be called to be a kind of philosophy and even a kind of philosophy teacher. Not in the sense that I am, not in the sense of giving lectures. Heaven help you. But in the sense of having to communicate some significant philosophical truths to people who don't have them or aren't aware, perhaps, that they don't have them. The way to do that is not going to be through any of the classroom tools that we have. In fact, I wonder if I shouldn't have a sort of elective on philosophical pedagogy, how to teach people philosophy without them realizing that you're teaching them. Either that it's philosophy or that you're teaching it to them. It's going to have, and I think that kind of task, that kind of, how are you going to educate, a confused 15-year-old about human nature, about the existence of human nature, objective truth? Well, you could say, look, there's human nature, there's objective truth. Dr. Annandale said so. You could say, here's the book, here's that, but all that academic stuff, that's not applicable to that. So we think almost of a kind of philosophical apologetics with all the sort of prudence and discernment and judgment of character that goes into that. It's a matter of being aware of the possibilities of the situation and the demands of the particular individual in front of you, the nature of your relationship with that individual. All of that I can say, and that's easy for me to say. I just have to stay here and keep giving lectures year after year for as long as they'll have me. But for you guys, it seems to me that fundamental prudential judgment in each case is informed by your own most fundamental attitude towards philosophy and philosophical wisdom in yourself. So it's your own possession of that Socratic spirit and your own understanding of and synthesis of your own philosophical identity, your own practice internally of philosophy, of being a philosopher. That seems to me to be the crucial determining factor in how well you'll be able to speak in 10 or 12 years to a 17-year-old kid or to a young married couple in crisis about some truths that they need to know. I struggle to articulate just what I think this type of identity of sort of the philosophy teacher that's implicit in the priest or in the minister or even the adult Catholic layman. Maybe it involves a kind of ministry of presence, kind of pedagogy of presence. It involves a kind of, I said already, prudence and judgment, which are all fine words, but not helpful ahead of time. I've said pretty much what I wanted to say, I think, in response to Chase, that it's your own attitude towards the discipline that's determinative. And I think the closed system attitude is going to serve you poorly in the kind of encounters where you need a kind of light-footed dynamism and the ability to respond with confidence to somebody's question about philosophical issues. You don't need the answers from me. You need the ability to react to the question and to draw somebody else into the question with you in those sort of circumstances, it seems to me. The answers are good to have, but most people are not ready for just off-the-shelf answers from you. I think that's the type of philosophy education, the type of philosophical engagement that has not been successful the past decades. About as far as I can go with that right now, I think. I'll sort of run to the end of that rope. Further thoughts on this? I don't know if anybody has had talks or experiences with pastors or priests. I occasionally will try to talk to former students of mine 5 years after ordination to see how well their philosophy education has served them. I'm being as frank as I can with you guys right now about how I think it might serve you, some of you. Go ahead.
Just a question and clarification. So if I follow what you were saying correctly, are you saying that philosophy, at least when talking to someone who has these kinds of questions, it's more about giving them the ability to discern the question instead of just giving them the answer. And is that as a way to prevent like dogmatism, or is that like?
There are some places where dogmatism is called for, and there's good and bad dogmatism, of course. I think that philosophy, both the content and the method of philosophy, leans against dogmatism. I won't say it never has a place, but it seems to me, especially in the place and time we are, all of us will live the remainder of our lives in 21st century America, that seems to me to be the case. Yeah. This Kierkegaard is actually quite a good place for us to finish the semester because he's quite good on this question. When people think that you're trying to dogmatize at them, their defenses go up. Right? You tell them let me tell you some truth. Let me lay some truth on you. Right? They've got all sorts of layers of irony and self-defense. Okay. Why? It has to do something with the decline of reason. You say, let me convince you something rationally. People are convinced that you're going to manipulate them. Okay. Kierkegaard's suggestion, which I don't think we'll get to next week, but it's worth knowing about, is that it is the aesthetic that will make the end run around these intellectual defenses. Okay. It is the appeal to beauty. It is the appeal of art that communicates truth. So that may be the place. Maybe if I'm thinking here, maybe the demands of our century and of our culture is such that it is the aesthetic that will take the lead, and it is the philosophical and rational that will follow immediately. Right? So the aesthetic is your sort of cavalry charge which punches through enemy lines, and then your infantry is your philosophical reasoning and thought and discussion that comes through. Let's make those two work together. If that's the path. We're talking about smashing through enemy lines is probably not the friendliest metaphor, but the difference between cavalry that makes the initial charge and then the infantry that follows to secure the ground, that may be a good metaphor. Meaning that you need not just truth and wisdom, but rhetoric. You need to speak well and beautifully. You also need the ethos that goes with a quality of character. We talked, I think, in a previous class, logic class, about ethos, pathos, and logos, right? Logos coming third. Ethos, the character of the speaker, fundamental. Reflecting now this week upon the Kierkegaard report, recalling just how absolutely devastating to the ethos of probably a century or more of Catholic priests, the errors of the past few decades have been. People need to be able to trust you. Okay, you need to see your truth in your character.